welcome to Fair Trade, a Project Zion podcast series where courageous people share the candid stories of their faith journey and what brought them to Community of Christ. I'm your host, Robin Linkhart, and today I'm here with Miranda Giles. Welcome, Miranda. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Robin. It's an honor to be with you.
So I want to take a minute first off to just let you introduce yourself to our listeners, kind of like you're meeting somebody for the first time.
Sure. Well, I am Miranda Giles. I am 41 years old, and I've lived in Salt Lake for 7 years today, actually, just moved here, but grew up in Southern California and lived in and around Utah, Arizona, Idaho, since I was a teenager. So happy to be settled now in the Salt Lake area. And I work in tech in a marketing company remotely. I work from home, which is wonderful. And I get to worship with the wonderful Salt Lake congregation of Community of Christ.
Thanks so much. Okay, we're going to take you on a deep dive now to tell us your story. And it really helps out if we just start at the very beginning and tell us about faith and God and church, whatever that looked like during your growing up years. We want you to start with where you were born and just take it from there through high school.
Sure. Well, this is a coincidental or fateful day to be recording this. I don't know if people know, but it's July 24th, which is actually Utah's Pioneer Heritage Day, where we commemorate Brigham Young coming through into the Salt Lake Valley and saying this is the right place. And I had a number of ancestors who were traveling there from Nauvoo into the Salt Lake Valley at that time. And then other ancestors who came over from England and Denmark in the following years. So I am, as they say in the Mormon tradition, of pioneer stock. And was raised in I think we were I'm the seventh generation of Latter-day Saint, like strong and pretty faithful women in particular that came down that line. And my pioneer ancestry was something that was very much alive for me growing up as a very faithful and active Mormon girl in the Fullerton State in California. And my parents met at BYU. I went to BYU fully expecting to meet my eternal companion there and to embark on a life of service in the church. I was told from a young age from various sources that I had a special gift, that I was, had the gift of faith was something that came up repeatedly for me in my life. And I've looked back on that now, and I wonder if that wasn't just a nice way of saying I was a very obedient child. I was very interested in being good. And whatever tradition I had been raised in, I would have been really good at it. And I was, blessed to be in a family where hard work and love and dedication and doing good for your community and all of these wonderful principles that I was raised with were really taught me from a very young age. And I just rejoiced in being part of that, in every part of that. And I felt special. I felt unique. I felt like I had a calling in life to share, as especially growing up in Southern California. Being LDS wasn't the predominant religion to be part of. And it just felt like such an honor that I was part of this very special family and special group of people who loved each other and took care of each other and also wanted to share that with everyone. So I was definitely the kid who was inviting her friends to church and was the first. We lived about 2 blocks from the LDS chapel, and I would walk to church first and save the row for my family. I'm the youngest of 5 siblings. And it was just really, it was the defining feature of my life was being LDS growing up. And that felt like what could be better. So I was always really grateful for that.
So what was junior high and high school like for you? Did you have a lot of friends from church or you had lots of friends from
Oh,
school or both?
well, I did. I definitely struggled. I mean, I suppose at this point I've made it sound like it was all sunshine and roses, which there was so much good. And I heard another author, one of my favorite authors, John Green, said just recently, repeated a quote that he said, where he said, I had a very happy childhood, but I was not a happy kid. And that feels very true. I think I was quite sensitive. And as much as I loved being special and selected for being LDS, I also felt apart often from the larger group. Um, and some of that I think was me bringing that on myself, and some of it was probably other people's perception of me. But um, I had a lot of I had friends, but I think I felt sort of adrift at times. I would kind of move from different social circles. I didn't always feel perfectly comfortable with the church community. Even within that small group, there was among the teens, the young people, there was just the normal levels of drama and dislike and fights and infighting and being friends and breaking up as friends. But I was really lucky to have some really strong, lasting friendships through even elementary school, through high school. And I was also very involved from a young age in theater. That's my background of study. I studied theater at BYU, and I have a master's degree in fine arts in theater for youth specifically. But at that time, I was in the drama club, and I was very busy with extracurriculars. Not particularly athletic, but enjoyed, spending time with my friends. And I remember one day walking to come back to the church things. I remember walking to church one afternoon and doing a quick calculation that I was essentially working 20 hours a week for the church as just a normal Mormon girl going to seminary 5 times a week through high school, singing in the choir, doing my little young women's callings and going to activities. And it was like a full-time job being a high school student and a good Mormon kid. So it was definitely busy, and I had my sights set on going to college, so I just kept myself busy.
Thanks for telling us about that. So you're graduating from high school in Southern California and you're heading off to BYU. Take us through those years and on to what came after.
Yeah, well, one of my first, I thought at the time, a real trial of my faith was that I had expected to go to BYU my whole life, like my sisters had before me and my parents had before them. And then I didn't get accepted to BYU Provo or BYU Hawaii, which would have been even better. And I ended up going to what had been Rick's College for the very first semester that it was BYU Idaho. And this was a thing I had prayed about, and I felt very clearly I was supposed to go to BYU. And when I got that rejection letter, I basically called them and said, "Excuse me, but the Lord has said that I am supposed to go to Provo, so you should reconsider." And they said, "Well, sorry." And I had to really wrestle with what to make of that. And I do think I received a comforting spirit at that time to tell me, yes, but maybe not now. And so I was able to transfer down to Provo after 2 semesters, and that really did work out quite well because BYU Idaho had much easier, I'll just say, frankly, like easier classes for general eds that I then was able to graduate with my associate's degree after those 2 years and move to Provo. However, that was really the beginning of struggles. My very first semester at my very first week of class at BYU Idaho happened to be September. I think we started class on the 7th, 2001. And just a few days into class, I woke up on a beautiful morning and walked to class. And this was before cell phones. I didn't have a phone in my pocket. I didn't have a TV in my dorm. And by the time I got to class, we sat, I think, outside the classroom waiting for our professor to arrive, and people were starting to gossip. I mean, they were starting to share the news of what they had seen. And I don't remember if the professor ever showed up, but I walked over to another professor who I was close with, his office, And we listened to the radio as the towers fell and the Pentagon was struck, and it just felt like the end of the world. For a good American conservative, religious-minded child. I was 17 at this point, and that day and the months that followed after were quite transformative. Not in the way, for me, they were politically transformative and spiritually transformative, because I saw suddenly around me this rising tide of hate, of rage, of the need for vengeance. And here I was shaking my Book of Mormon at the world and saying, this is very clear about what we should do. And like, who are we going to go to war with? And I'm suddenly feeling like, who am I who've been called conservative? And my whole life, I was always, the conservative, I wouldn't say I was necessarily Republican, but a very conservative girl. And suddenly I was the liberal. I was the peacenik, the hippie who was going against the tide of what the whole country seemed to be interested in. And for me, my understanding of that was so rooted in my love for Christ and for the teachings of the church that I'd been raised in, that it just blew my mind. It baffled me that other people were seeing this moment so differently and experiencing it so differently. And I do think that in many ways that pivotal moment sort of set me on a path of feeling like eventually I wasn't going to be able to be, at least in that religion that I had been raised in. Because I saw the change. If that wasn't necessarily the beginning, but in many ways it was an awakening for me. It was certainly a very strong marker of the end of my childhood. So from there, I had already in high school sort of set a 13-year plan for myself, because that's the obedient kid I was. So at 13, I made a plan to get me through college and marriage. And, the last piece of that was that I was going to get swept off my feet and have a happily ever after. But I went off to school. I did well in school. And also in that plan was to serve an LDS mission. So at 20 years old, very faithfully, as soon as I could, turned in my mission papers and was called to Australia, to the Melbourne mission, and served more than 18 months, my allotted time there. And that was a very positive experience at the time. It was also, the people. I will say the people were a very positive experience, seeing another part of the world, although landing in the Melbourne airport, I very much looked around and went, oh, well, this is just Southern California, the South version. It was I landed in my first area, which was the Mornington Peninsula. And I went, oh, this is just Newport Beach, California, circa 1970, essentially. So that was fun, but not a huge cultural shift either. But what awakened me during my mission was both the rather corporate nature of the LDS Church. Everything, I went very much with a heart to serve Christ and to spread the message of the good news. And then suddenly I was being told, well, how many of these lessons have you taught a week, a day? How many new people are you talking to? It was just reporting. It all felt very corporate. It felt very door-to-door sales. And I had a lovely Kiwi mission president who was understanding of that desire, but he was also like the financial president of the LDS Church's Pacific area. And so he was a very corporate-minded church member as well. And in some ways, I could see where he was coming from. I was able to get over that initial shock of, oh, I'm just here to knock doors. And once I started meeting people, I felt much more at peace and was able to do, I think, some good work. I saw light in people's eyes as I taught. But the other thing it instilled was it highlighted, because serving a mission is a very, by its nature, the rules, especially at the time I was serving in the early 2000s, it bred a sense of scrupulosity, religious scrupulosity. So suddenly, I'm worried I'm not praying enough. Am I allowed? We, especially among the sisters, this is something that doesn't get talked about much, but eating disorders are quite rampant. People get very dysregulated on their eating. Um, I had companions, Pacific Island companions, who were sure that if we could just fast for one more day, we would meet the person that needed to be baptized, which was quite unhealthy. And it was an awakening of some anxiety that I didn't know I had not struggled with openly previous to that. I think I had my first panic attack while knocking doors because I was suddenly faced with this, one more door shut in my face, and it felt very much like here I am day after day, literally trying to hand my heart to these people, the most precious thing I have, which is my love for Jesus, and to have them just say, no thanks, I'm fine. It just felt like, the world like crashes down at some point. And so that was difficult. And coming home was difficult. I remember getting back to BYU, and sitting in a room full of young adults, and they're chit-chatting and flirting and doing all the things that normal 23-year-olds should do. And I'm just sitting there in my head screaming, thinking, there are people who need the gospel right now. What are we doing? And I think it's also, I've found, talking to other returned missionaries, it's pretty common for years and sometimes for a long time after to have a reoccurring dream or nightmare that you're being sent back out on a mission full time. And you can love your mission and still never want to do that again. And so the panic nightmare of, oh no, please don't make me go again. I already did that. I had that for a while after. So I finished up at BYU. I was studying theater. That was wonderful. Another thing that was an awakening about being in theater for so long at this point, and in this time in the U.S., was gay marriage became very much the political moment, the discussion of the moment, and I was surrounded by queer people who were, especially at BYU, actively wrestling with their sexuality and their sexual identity and their gender identities at the time. Like, we didn't even necessarily have the language for that at the time, but I saw in wrestling alongside those people how deeply they loved and how deeply they cared and how intensely, not only that they loved each other in queer relationships, but also that they loved the Lord as much as I did. They had as much faith or more faith than I had. And over a course of several years, I saw my own heart shift so dramatically from standing beside the church to, for the first time in my life, in 2008, when Prop 208 was up for voting in California to make gay marriage illegal. And my mother had been persuaded to donate a significant sum of money to the church's political campaign. It was the first time I really saw also the LDS Church become politically active, after a lifetime of being told that the church was not a political organization, to see it take such a firm stance. And I know it spent a lot of money on that campaign. It was the first time in my life I said out loud, the church is wrong about this. And that was a big break for me. That was a big shift, to go against this ruling force, really, of my life, and to assert for myself that I didn't see the light of Christ or of God in this decision that the church was making, and that, in combination with all the things I've mentioned previously, was I remember exactly. It's a very visceral memory for me of having that thought and allowing it to come out of me. In those years. So this is now, I had moved down to Southern Utah. I was living in Cedar City, working at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, a place very dear to my heart. But I was in also my first romantic relationship with a very good man who struggled with very normal young man behaviors. And to see him be what we refer to as bishop roulette, where he would go from one ward to another in the LDS church and be treated very differently depending on who his local leaders were, as all he wanted, and I believed this, all he wanted was to marry me. We wanted to get married in the temple. We wanted to do it right. And everywhere we turned, we were given a different story about what his required repentance would be and how long it would take. And through all of that, we had started it. Well, anyway, it was, we got engaged, perhaps against my better judgment, and we planned a wedding. And then he was denied a temple recommend 2 weeks before we were supposed to be married. And it really destroyed both of us, I think, in many ways. It was extremely shaming, and it had to be public because the church leader, who I do think was trying to be kind, he sat and cried with us. But he said, I cannot let you be married in the temple, but I would be happy to marry you outside the temple. But it's really your choice, Miranda. What do you want to do? And that just, it was a lot. But I also knew at that time, I was very convicted with this idea that I could never be happy with a non-temple marriage, and not eternal and immediately a temple marriage. So we postponed the wedding, and then we ended up ending our engagement about a year later, after just a horrible year for both of us of racking our mental health, trying to make things work. And I put that pain at the feet of the church because we loved each other. I think we could have had a very happy marriage, but that was not to be. And I know in the years since then, he's left and I've left, and it might have all worked out. And there were plenty of reasons it shouldn't have worked out, also. But it was a very painful experience. And from there, I fled my position. After he moved away for his graduate school, we broke up. I sold everything I owned and got a job teaching in Italy, actually. I spent 6 months working for a theater education company in Italy, where I got to travel and live out of a van and roll up to Italian elementary schools and put on little shows that were teaching the kids English. And it was a very fun time, a great break from the life that I'd had. And also the first time I was really outside of my American bubble. I didn't have a missionary companion to watch over me at all times. I was living with three wonderful Brits who were about my own age, and they were out drinking at night and ordering wine with dinner and, behaving in all the appropriate ways for 26-year-olds. And I sort of looked around and went, well, these are really good people and I'm a good people. So why? I would love to have a glass of wine with dinner, but I'm going to keep ordering wine. I'm going to keep ordering water, which was actually more expensive because I was still very much in tune with my LDS temple covenants of being chaste and following the word of wisdom. So in that time, I think it was that time in Italy, and also while I was there, I had applied to grad school just before, and I got accepted to graduate school in Arizona. And it was then that I started to really imagine and have a larger picture for what life could look like, still having a good life, but maybe outside of LDS teaching and LDS authority in my life. So that takes me through about age 28.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot. A lot of beautiful experiences, a lot of awakenings, a lot of really hard stuff and heartbreak. A lot. And you're 28. That's a lot for a young life. So how did
It
you?
was a beautiful
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, we are very beautiful. And Italy just sounds lovely, just so lovely. How did you find Community of Christ and what did that look like?
So when I got back from Italy, I moved to Arizona in August, which was horrific in its own way. 108 degrees in the middle of the night still. But I was suddenly going to school with folks who were uh, had no LDS background and having to kind of explain all of that. And, Arizona is still quite Mormon, but I was in the theater graduate program with people from all over the country who had no experience with being LDS. And actually, I was still active in the LDS singles ward there. And I met, I don't know, I don't know if she's still active in Community of Christ, but I met my first ever member of Community of Christ. I've been thinking about her so much in the last few years. Her name's Christy Williams. Christy, if you're out there, remember how I tried to get you baptized? I think I did actually maybe get you baptized into the LDS church because you were coming to the singles ward. And I was looking at you with wide-eyed wonder going, who's this wonderful, welcoming, beautiful girl who's so confident? And she had grown up in LDS or in Community of Christ. And I had known about the RLDS church growing up, but never in a positive way. It was always framed as sort of to be impolite, the bastard stepchild of the LDS church. And we left it at that. There wasn't a lot of understanding, those. And I do remember sometime in the 90s when I would have been 8 years old, probably when women received the priesthood. It would have been even before that happened. But when I heard about that, it was very much talked about in how far they've fallen way. uh, but back to that point, this is now 2012 through 2014. There grew out of the rise of social media a very active online voice of a group called Feminist Mormon Housewives, among other bloggers, that were starting to write about things that I hadn't thought deeply about. I had thought about them and thought I knew what the Lord wanted for me as a strong, independent, powerful Mormon woman who had been empowered all my life to be a great servant in the church. And I had always held, and members of my family had always held leadership callings. And suddenly I'm reading articles that are just asking questions that I hadn't considered. Well, why can't a woman hold power over finances in the church? There's no reason that a woman who's an accountant couldn't be as equally good at counting tithes and offerings as a man. Why would that need to be a priesthood calling? Why should the president of the Sunday school need to be a man? There's no reason for these to be priesthood offices. And I remember going down a list point by point that some group put out. Well, it was Ordained Women is who it was, actually. It was the Ordained Women movement. And going down that list and suddenly going, oh. And I had never in my life, I had never identified as a feminist because I had been taught only, the understanding in my mind was only a weak woman would really need feminism because she can't take care of herself. She needs, I don't know. It doesn't really make any sense in hindsight, but this suddenly was, again, the first time in my life that I'm saying like, oh no, I am a feminist. I do think these are inequities and they should be corrected. And wow, these women are wearing church on Sunday or pants to church on Sunday. That shouldn't be revolutionary, actually. And yet somehow it so was. It was so revolutionary. And I watched online some of the actions around Temple Square where women who I am now blessed to worship with in Community of Christ in Salt Lake were denied entry to the priesthood session. And I was so moved. I was so touched that to watch these women be turned away from worshiping at the feet of the Savior, was what I had perceived that to be. And then to see the church react by excommunicating people who were saying these thoughts out loud and making important statements about it. Another visceral memory, I remember where I was. I was actually in Europe with my mom. We were traveling around as part of my graduate program. And I was sitting on a hotel room watching on the news as ISIS is invading, which still felt like the aftermath of 9/11, ISIS invading Syria, happening, I think, at the same time, someone can fact check this, but as John Dehlin is getting excommunicated on my phone. And this just incredible moment of those two things felt related. It felt like this American exceptionalism had made had made possible the rise of these terrorist groups. And here's ISIS storming into another country with their fundamental religion, while my fundamental religion, fundamentalist church teachings, are threatening the spiritual eternal health, eternal life, and salvation of people who were speaking truth and just wanting basic communications and a statement, just a statement from the church. Even it all felt very, very unfair. Um, so that was I started to see online discussion in those spaces. I was in progressive Mormon Facebook groups and things, and more people were sort of mentioning, oh, look at Community of Christ. They have navigated as a community a sort of a faith transition, and that can be a really helpful model for folks who are uh, in faith crisis or a faith transition in the LDS church. And it all came to a crashing point in 2018. I had been teaching theater in high school for 3 years at this point. I had also moved in with my first ever boyfriend and had told my family that I had moved in with him, and it it wasn't working out. The boyfriend wasn't working out, but I knew I needed to make a change. And in 2018, I decided I would stop finally attending church. Um, and this was all after I had gone through very much those years, those 6 years from about 2012 to 2018. I was very much in a I can fix this phase. I can solve these problems. I had a secret mission that I felt like was blessed by the Lord to uh, become a seminary teacher full time and uproot church curriculum from the very, the tower. I was going to climb all the way up to the top level of church curriculum and rewrite things and fix the proclamation on the family and fix um, the church's stance on gay marriage. And surprise, I wasn't able to do that. And it came down to a Sunday where trying to teach, I was asked to teach the young women about chastity. And I knew we had girls in that room who had been sexually abused. And I just couldn't deliver the message the way I was supposed to and talk about their worth being tied to their chastity. And I just wrote an email to the bishop and to the young women's president saying, I can't do this. This will be my last Sunday. And they said, I said, I can teach this Sunday a modified version of the lesson. And they said, no, 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 we got it. That's fine. They didn't have me teach that lesson. And I never went back. And it was really shocking after, I was, 35 years old at this point, 34 probably. And I never heard another word from anybody really in the LDS church other than my family. I think I got one more email from like the first counselor who I was close with. He was also my home teacher. But to put in an actual lifetime of service, where I had served as in every calling possible and at the highest levels and given every bit of my soul, and to just walk away and to not have anyone say, wait, where are you going? How can we help? It was really shocking. Not that I wanted it. It wouldn't have changed my mind. It wouldn't have gotten me going back again, but um, it was a stark moment. But I got in my car and I drove to Salt Lake, and it was a beautiful day 7 years ago today that I was driving, and there was thunderstorms and there was rainbows and there were sunflowers. And I just knew, even though I had nowhere, I was moving in with a friend who I'd met 2 weeks before who was going through a divorce. We were brand new acquaintances, really. And I had no job and I had everything I owned in my little Chevy Cobalt. And I just knew this is going to be okay. This is going to work out. And it has. It's worked out beautifully. And that first week in Salt Lake was really magical. I attended a women's retreat that was being hosted by Gina Colvin, and I attended Sunstone. And at that table, I got to shake hands or hug for the first time Laura Pennock, who had been at that Ordained Women Action, and she's still one of my heroes. And they invited me to come to church on Sunday. And I showed up at Sunstone Sunday and we sang, I do believe we sang The Spirit of God. And I just sobbed. I just sobbed my way through that song. And then I don't know if it was that week or a week soon after, I watched Brittany Mangelson and her husband together bless the communion. And it shook my soul to see a husband and wife uh, performing a sacrament together. And it just, that felt like so natural and so correct and so right. So those first few weeks in Community of Christ were alarming almost in how beautiful and right and healing they felt, because it was suddenly I was in this space that felt so safe and so welcoming, familiar but different in all the right ways. And it was really a beautiful, it was a beautiful welcoming.
So that was about 7 years ago.
Exactly 7 years ago.
Yeah, exactly
Yeah.
7. Yeah. So what's happened in the last 7 years?
So I was living a little closer than I am now, but I bought a house. I was able to buy before COVID the last decently priced home, I think, in Salt Lake. I got very lucky. I was able to transition my career into away from, I miss the classroom terribly. I miss working in arts full time, but I appreciate the stability that I have in my new career. And it's afforded me to buy a perfect little house for myself and to develop a community around me where I get to do theater at night and on the weekends, and I get to, have a comfortable living, and that's
Mhm.
wonderful. And I've also been so um, welcomed by the community here in Salt Lake at Community of Christ, and a moment that so I didn't think I really enjoyed going to services at Community of Christ, but also I think anyone who's familiar with it will know that that was a bit of a rocky time in the Salt Lake
Yeah.
congregation. There was a lot going on, and so I wasn't necessarily a regular attendee. I would come probably once every few months, or
Hmm.
twice a month would have been really a really impressive run for me. And then we had COVID, and I just stayed home.
Hmm.
I attended on a Zoom a few times, but I sort of stepped away. I made myself known, and I had friends that I had established there. And Carla was wonderful to me as our pastor at that time, and so I knew I was always welcome, but I never expected that I would become a full member of the church. And then in the last year, well, I ended another relationship that wasn't great for me.
Hmm.
And we had been together all through COVID, and this was 2022. I had been, anyway, I was laid off of a job that was really unfortunate and hard. And um, I had been living with my boyfriend and renting my home during COVID. And I was able to move back home and start a big renovation project on my house. And um, it just sort of freed up the time and space in my life for me to become more engaged and lean into Community of Christ. And part of that was I attended our women's retreat, and it was truly magical. There were so many amazing women there together, and we laughed and cried and bonded over our shared experiences. And to me, that was really pivotal in saying, like, oh, I can have a home here. And then we've had just an amazing group of people who've started attending in Salt Lake over the last 2 years. And
Hmm.
those people keep me coming back. We're going to have a non-traditional pie and beer party tonight. Actually, I'm leaving from recording this to go to our Community of Christ party, where we're going to have pie. I'm actually bringing cake because I'm a rebellious pioneer. And we'll have root beer floats. And it's just a wonderful group of people. So I think we might be a little unorthodox for Community of Christ, but we have a very good time.
Yes.
And I was able to attend World Conference also this last 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And that was also really enlightening to see that I do fit in the bigger picture of the church.
That is, it's a totally different experience coming to World Conference and really seeing in flesh and blood the international, global
Yes.
context of who we are. And it's
Hmm.
just lovely. So, you for sure know that faith is a lifelong journey. And I'm wondering what were or are some of the challenges for you as you live into this new faith tradition, which is a distinctly different path in the restoration movement.
Yeah. So I think the biggest struggle for me in being part of Community of Christ, and this will probably be a lifelong struggle, I expect, is my relationship with the early restoration and the early history of the church. I had a moment on my mission. I loved teaching about Jesus always. I loved teaching about the wonderful community of the LDS church. But I remember really going to my knees again and again about what did Joseph Smith, who was he? What did he do? Do I believe this man? And yes, I believe that a young person can see God. I do believe in I believe in the theme and the idea of restoration and revelation and personal and like a community growing out of a revelatory experience. But I really struggle with my understanding and relationship to Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And frankly, I never thought I would be baptized into Community of Christ because it felt like, why would I tie myself to that messy history? Why would I continue to tie myself to that when I struggle with it so much? And I have a lot of big feelings around Joseph Smith and his life, and Brigham Young. But I decided when I was actually watching the confirmation of another member of the Salt Lake congregation who had been LDS growing up, and when she gave her little her message after her confirmation, oddly enough, it was a scripture from the Book of Mormon that popped into my mind that said, I think Alma at the Waters of Mormon saying, "What have ye against being baptized?" And it blew me away that that scripture would come to my mind. But I realized I can use this as a reclaiming of my own spirituality and of my heritage. I can set my life on a path that I think is the path that my pioneer ancestors wanted to be on. They were not traditional people. They were revolutionaries in their time. It takes a pretty revolutionary spirit to be willing to walk 1,300 miles across the country to found a place you think is going to be Zion. And this idea of Zion is something I latched onto as a teenager, and it has always stuck with me. This idea that there could be a world where there are no poor among us, where we are all equal in the sight of God, and we're all loved and we take care of one another. I still see Zion as uh, the kingdom of God on earth. And the shift for me, and this um, leads into the idea of sort of another big wrestle or struggle, has been straining this understanding. My new spiritual understanding has strained my relationships with my family, who are still my mother and my siblings, who are all very active in the LDS church, and who I went from being a golden child to a black sheep pretty quickly. um, and I'm grateful for that because it has opened up communication in my family that I think has needed to happen for a long time. And some of the next generation of my family, my siblings' children they were able to come to me with their struggles, with their not struggles, but their true identities of their sexuality, and I was able to be there for them, and we have now, we're very close, and um, these are conversations that I hate to think what would have happened if they didn't have a safe person in our family to talk to and to help them as they stepped away from their own uh, community and their own close family relationships to be true to who they are as queer folk. um, so those are some of the struggles that have come in becoming part of Community of Christ.
Was there anything you had to give up that was or has been difficult for you?
Uh, it's not a giving up. I also think for folks who may be on the seeker side of things and who are exploring Community of Christ or stepping out of LDS teachings, uh, there's the family wrestle is one thing, and time has been a healer in that. And just I had to make a very distinct decision to say, I will have to hurt my family, my mother in particular. I will have to hurt her feelings by telling her what I believe, but I would rather hurt her than drift away, than lose her quietly. And we have been able to have, thanks to her strength and her maturity as well, difficult conversations that have really challenged her. And she has been very affirming and said, I would rather we have these hard conversations than that we don't have any conversations at all. So that is an approach that I think has been really helpful. And she is now an advocate to say she doesn't believe that I won't be with her in whatever the next life is. And she's sure that, God will make all of this right, which is great. Um, the other side of the struggle, I think for me, and this is something else I will probably continue to struggle with, is because I was raised to never say no to a calling and always give everything to the expense of my own well-being in the LDS Church. I struggle with putting boundaries now around my service in Community of Christ and in other areas of my life as well. I I want to go above and beyond, and I also know that that's not always healthy. And I think this is something as a congregation we're actually wrestling with a little bit right now because we all have, all of us who have come from this LDS background, we're very nervous about asking other people for help and trying to wrangle people into doing service that will make our community more functional, our congregation more functional, because we don't want to overburden anybody. But it's also an honor and a blessing to be able to step up and serve that congregation as I'm able to. So it's exciting and an ongoing balancing act.
Oh, for sure. So, Miranda, as you walk with church members and friends and new seekers, all kinds of people, what do you see people looking for in their church or their faith or spiritual experience? What connects for them in meaningful ways as some of them choose to journey with or spend time with Community of Christ? What are the big life questions people are asking?
I have been wrestling today and lately, and for a few years now. I think it's becoming more and more clear here in the United States that we have some really existential level identity questions that we're struggling with around what it means to be a successful society. We have measured our well-being in GDP and economic growth and stock market increases, and we have really lost in many areas. We're seeing the challenges, the real struggles, the life and death struggles of people in poverty and the loss of a middle class that's able to hold our society together. And that is pretty dangerous. And I know I'm not the only one today who feels utterly powerless in the face of a starving population in Gaza. We're seeing babies dying of malnutrition, despite the fact that we have many of us given generously to try and feed them and solve this problem. And we've reached this crux as a nation, I think, where we see that there is, no matter how popular a political idea or a change is, it doesn't matter because there is so much power in the hands of those, essentially those who are so wealthy that their decisions are the only ones that matter. And it is a sense of despair when the sense of despair that sets in when you know something could be done and you have no power to do it is really devastating. And I think one of the things that Community of Christ allows me to do is to take action in meaningful ways in my local community, because the only antidote that I know for helplessness is action, is doing something, do what you can do. And so um, I look for ways to serve at a very small level in my congregation, but I'm also doing things like I'm running for the water board of trustees in my local neighborhood. I'm going to be on the ballot this November, which is very exciting. And I thought, it'll be fine. I'll be able to vote on small things. And I know another person who was on the water board across town, and she said, "Oh, I was able to get paternity leave secured for the office workers." And I said, "Oh, that's amazing. What a gift for those fathers to be able to take more time off with their new babies." But also, I just found out today that one of the things I can help vote on is I can help have a voice on if I do end up on the water board. Even if I don't, I can still have a voice on this. I can try and make action. There's a huge water diversion project happening in Utah where they're building canal, they're trying to divert water from the Bear River to southern Utah so that they can expand and keep building in the desert where there's no infrastructure, there's no water. Why would we build houses in the middle of the desert where there's no water at the risk of draining the Great Salt Lake? And, my neighborhood will be affected by the arsenic that has been dumped into that lake over the last 100 years. As it dries up, that dust is blowing. Climate change is an existential threat. All of this is swirling around us. And I don't find we've been talking so much about hope in the church over the last year and forever, frankly, but hope is very much it isn't believing that things will get better. It's the act of fighting in spite of the ongoing dread and the hopelessness. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how hopeless it gets. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep trying to do what I can do.
Well, that's a great segue to the next question about what are your hopes for Community of Christ?
Yes. As I think again on this Pioneer Day about the radical beliefs of my ancestors who joined the church in Nauvoo and shortly thereafter, they were, to be pretty clear, I think they were communists. I think they were revolutionaries. I think they were fleeing a life. Many of them fled out of Europe, out of lives of poverty and destitution on the crazy hope that they were going to join a prophet of God in a new country, speaking a language they couldn't understand, at the merest hope of a better life. And that is a revolutionary act. And I hope that early spirit of the Church of Christ in its early days, under those crazy times of Kirtland and Nauvoo, I think that Community of Christ should embrace some of that a little bit more, and its radical love and its radical nature and its political activity. Not that all of that was great. It didn't all work out, that's for sure. But it tried, and it wasn't afraid. I will say this for Joseph Smith. He was not afraid of trying and failing. And so we might need to fail a little bit more in our actions, but we got to swing big and we got to swing for the fences and make some radical decisions that are going to make people uncomfortable. And we will not all be, that's not a recipe for comfort and pleasant life, but it is, I do think that is where God touches people, is when they are outside of their comfort zone and trying things they haven't tried before. I was just talking to, I don't know if you've gotten this sense, but I love falling in love. So I'm always falling in love with someone. And I'm not married, but I am in a new relationship. And my current boyfriend. He is trying to make bread for the first time, and I gave him some of my sourdough starter, which is another sacred act. And anyway, we were just having a conversation about the sacred nature of rough drafts and first attempts, and that God is in a first draft. So it's okay if the first time you bake bread, it's a terrible disaster. It turns out it's probably still going to taste like bread, even if it's not as good looking as the bread on the internet. But you can still eat it, and it will very much have your love and the blessing of the Spirit in it because you're trying something new, and that's what matters.
I love it. I love it. Miranda, is there anything I have not asked you today that you'd like to share with our listeners?
uh, I also am thinking today very much about the sacred nature of art. And that goes along with what I was just saying. As I've mentioned, I'm a theater artist. I write and I produce and I direct and I act on occasion. One of my radical acts for this year was to get back on the stage. I performed in a local community production of The Man of La
Mm,
Mancha, and I played head wench number 6. It was great. It was wonderful. And that music is so moving, and just to spend nights singing the song about the impossible dream and
mm,
reaching for unreachable stars. This is an act of radical hope as well. And I would encourage more people to get involved in local arts and to spend time being making art that is make it bad. It's fine. Just make art. It's not meant to be good. It's meant to be good for you. And there is power. I'm speaking to myself as well here, is like there is great power in making something badly and having it be terrible and facing that and then saying, well, I did it. At least I did it. And it doesn't have to be, draw something, paint something.
mm-hmm.
I've started painting little corners of my house. I've started painting little flower decor on
Mm,
the crawl space entry for my house, and the plumbing access panel are now covered in wildflowers because it's just a little bit of joy
yeah,
and whimsy and like beauty I can add to my life, and that is what art is about. So that is something when you're feeling hopeless to latch onto, is create something.
that is beautiful. Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Miranda, it's been great. I've just loved hearing your story, and what a privilege to spend this time with you. And thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much, Robin.
And as always, a very special thanks to all of our listeners for spending a portion of your day with us. If you would like to hear more from courageous people willing to share the candid stories of their faith journey and what brought them to Community of Christ, check out our Fair Trade series on projectzionpodcast.org, or you can click on the link listed in today's show notes, which will take you to all of our Fair Trade episodes. This is your host, Robin Linkhart, and you are listening to Project Zion Podcast. Go out and make the world a better place. Take good care. Bye bye.